Hi, Year Six. Welcome to your science lesson. Today we're going to continue with our new topic of variation. Let me just share my screen so we can get started with today's lesson. Great. So today is in our French date, vendredi le 5 février 2021. And our learning objective is to identify how animals and plants are adapted to suit their environment in different ways. So our big question today is, what characteristics help animals to survive? Now, to be successful in answering your big question by the end of this lesson, you will need to do the following from our success criteria. You will need to describe animals' environments. You'll need to explore what characteristics help animals in different environments. So remember, exploring is asking questions, okay? And you also need to discuss variation, as well as consider whether characteristics are advantageous or disadvantageous. And finally, you'll need to consider whether the same variation would be advantageous for all species of an animal. So there are some words in there that you may not be familiar with, but that's okay because we're going to go through some key words together. Now, because we are learning to identify how animals and plants are adapted to suit their environment in different ways, you will need to challenge your knowledge, your identifying. And also, when you are considering whether characteristics are advantageous or disadvantageous, you're using your skills of how different characteristics help animals, and you're applying that uh, into this lesson and how certain characteristics might be more beneficial compared to others. But first, let's get going with our just checking. So can you have a go at answering the following 4 questions? So last week, what is the scientific definition of the word inheritance? The scientific, remember. Last unit, we learned about classification. So which of these plants is not a flowering plant? Last term, you learnt about healthy bodies. Which of these food groups is needed to keep your digestive system healthy? And finally, last year, you learnt about Earth and space. How long does it take for Earth to rotate all the way around its axis? Okay. So have a go, pause the screen, and when you're done, press play and I will reveal the answers. Great, how did it go? Here are the answers. So our scientific definition of the word inheritance is the passing of traits or characteristics from one generation to the next. Well done if you got pine tree for last unit, fiber for last term, and 24 hours for Earth and Space last year. Well done, let's continue. So again, here is our big question. What characteristics will help animals to survive? Bit bendy there, oops. So at the end of this lesson, you'll be able to answer this question. But let's have a look at some vocabulary. So do you remember there was some pieces of vocabulary from our success criteria and learning objective that you may not be particularly familiar with? So our learning objective is to identify how animals and plants are adapted to suit their environment in different ways. So let's have a look at adapted first, okay? Here. Adapted, so comes from the root word adapt, which means change, okay? So characteristics can change over time as an animal gets used to their environment, okay? And that was something that we picked up on last lesson. Now, environment here is the conditions that surround you, okay? So anything that surrounds you is your environment. The conditions that surround you are your environment. Let's move on to the other definitions. We've got inheritance, which is the same for passing of traits or characteristics from parents to offspring. And we have variation, Actually, let's pick up on inheritance. We know inheritance can mean, when you inherit money from your parents. However, in scientific knowledge, we say inheritance is referring to the passing of traits or characteristics from parents to offspring. Okay, so variation is offspring will have many different characteristics to their parents, and that's what we call variation. And finally, characteristics are a feature or a quality belonging to a person. So my eyes are brown. That is my the characteristic I have for my eyes. Right, so let's have a look at Charles Darwin. Okay, feel free to read this through with me, but I'll read this out loud to you now. So Charles Darwin was born on the 12th of February 1809 in Shrewsbury, England. When he was 9 years old, Charles Darwin went to Shrewsbury School for Boys. Darwin did not particularly enjoy school and found some of the work, like Latin and Greek, hard. He did, however, love science and was always asking questions. When he was 13 years old, he set up a science lab in his garden shed. When he was 16 years old, Darwin was sent to Edinburgh to train to become a doctor, like his father, grandfather, and brother, who were also all doctors. However, Darwin did not enjoy it and knew he did not want to become a doctor. He didn't like looking at blood. His father then sent him to Cambridge to become a vicar. But he was more interested in learning about nature and animals. He had lots of friends and teachers at university who helped him to learn more about these things. So here is our picture of Charles Darwin over here. Okay, here's a pop quiz. So just on what we've read, can you remember how old Charles Darwin was when he was sent away to train to become a doctor? Pause the screen, have a think. Well done if you said 16. Okay, our second question. Name a profession other than a doctor that Darwin trained as. Pause the screen and have a think. Brilliant. Well done if you said vicar. And finally, where was Darwin born? Pause the screen and have a think. And the answer is Shrewsbury in England. Brilliant. Well done, everybody. Let's move on. So for your starter, can you describe the duck's environment? And what characteristics help it to survive? Okay, so what did you think of? Hopefully you said for the environment, you described it as wetlands or a pond or a lake. Hopefully you might have thought it's wet, cold, muddy, lots of grasses, lots of insects and other small animals. That's part of the environment. And hopefully you touched upon these ideas here for characteristics. So feathers that help it float, fly and stay dry, as well as a long beak for grabbing food on land and in water. And finally, webbed feet for swimming. So these are all characteristics that help the duck to survive, okay? Well done. Okay, so can you have a go at describing this environment? What characteristics help the water lily to survive? So this is a water lily. Here are a few water lilies here. What characteristics help this water lily to survive? Okay, so here are some ideas from me. I'll make it bigger if you would prefer that. So for the environment, hopefully you said it's a lake or a pond or slow moving streams and rivers. The water doesn't look like it's got much movement. Hopefully you said wet and cold as well as soft and muddy banks and ponds or riverbeds. So these are just a few ideas. If you thought of this as the description for the environment, well done. And some characteristics that help these water lilies to survive are the following: lots of roots that spread through soft soil, a long stem that reaches up to the surface, so underneath the water there is a long stem here, as well as flowers and leaves which float on water. So the flowers are, they don't sink under the water, they float on top of the water. Well done. So can you, so we looked at the characteristics that the lilies and the ducks had, and they were inherited, okay? What can you remember inherited means? Can we write a definition together? What's inheritance? Pause the screen, have a go at writing your own example for that definition. Okay, so we actually went through the definition together. Inheritance is the name for the passing of traits or characteristics from parents to offspring. So let's write that together. Inheritance is the passing of traits or characteristics from parents to children. So hopefully you remembered that that was what inheritance means. Well done. Okay, so another key word we had was advantageous. Okay, so we're going to be looking at characteristics that are advantageous for some animals and their survival. Okay, so we've got ad, which is our prefix, which means comparing. We have vantage, which means countable, and our so that creates advantage, which means favorable position. And ous is our suffix, which creates an adjective that shows possession or presence of a quality. So advantageous, we're looking at the benefits of certain characteristics that these animals have. So not all inherited characteristics are advantageous. They're not all beneficial, okay? Sometimes offspring will inherit characteristics from their parents which make it harder for them to survive. So here are some characteristics of a duck, okay? I want you to have a think about which of these characteristics would be advantageous, so which would be beneficial for a duck in terms of their survival. So we've got big webbed feet, a long neck, a short neck, a short beak, and short, strong legs. Which of the following are advantageous for a duck? Good. Hopefully you realize big webbed feet to keep them up above the water so that they can swim easier. A long neck so that they can reach for certain things like food, etc. Short, strong legs. Again, they have to swim a lot. So having strong legs would help them to swim for a longer time. But would the same characteristics be advantageous for this bird? So we've got a bird here. Do you think big webbed feet, a long neck, and short, strong legs would be advantageous for this bird? Have a think. So hopefully, so this is the spotted red shank. That's the bird's name, is the type of bird. And it's a wading bird. Its long legs help it to wade through shallow water. It catches small invertebrates living in the mud under the water with its long beak. So big webbed feet are good for swimming. However, they would be disadvantageous, so not helpful, not beneficial for wading birds that walk through shallow water. Okay? So well done if you had those kinds of thoughts. Let's have a look at this. So in this example, two unrelated spotted red shanks are born with different characteristics. Disadvantageous characteristics are less likely to be inherited than advantageous characteristics. So red shank A, this is red shank A, was born with a slightly longer than average beak. Why might this be advantageous? And red shank B was born with a slightly shorter than average beak. Why might this be disadvantageous? And also, can you have a think of another trait that might be disadvantageous? So, over time, redshanks and other wading birds eat lots of the invertebrates in the mud under the shallow water. So, redshanks, a slightly longer beak would allow it to go into the water deeper than most other birds that may want to find food under there. Okay, so a longer beak helps them to reach deeper into the water. Redshank B with the slightly shorter beak means that it can only hunt for food in shallow water, where food is probably scarcer, so there's less of it due to more birds being able to feed there. Okay, so more birds with shorter beaks can feed there, and so it's more likely that there will be less food available for the redshank bee. Okay, brilliant. Let's move on. So a redshank A can find plenty of food thanks to its slightly longer beak. It is fit and healthy enough to mate with other redshanks and produce offspring. Redshank B cannot find as much food and does not grow to be as healthy. Its offspring are smaller and less healthy too. Some of them may not survive. Okay. So Redshank A's offspring inherit the characteristics of a slightly longer than average beak. They too are able to feed in slightly deeper water and therefore have a good chance of surviving, breeding successfully, and producing offspring with slightly longer than average beaks. Okay, so because Redshank A has a longer beak and they're able to feed in deeper water, they have a higher chance of surviving because they've got that nutrition that they need. And so their offspring, their children that they produce, the children they produce will have slightly longer than average beaks too. So eventually, over many, many generations, this advantageous characteristics of the longer beak will spread across the entire species of spotted redshanks. All redshanks may evolve to be better adapted in this way. So evolve, change over time. Okay, they will change over time to be better adapted in this way. Right, so can you head over to Teams and so that you can answer the questions in the quiz for today's lesson. And these will challenge your knowledge that you have acquired in today's lesson. And hopefully you'll be able to answer our big question for today, which is, what characteristics help animals to survive? Okay, so if you would like an extra challenge or another activity for practice, here is an activity you can do. So there will be pictures. So here's just one picture that you might see on the document that's been saved on the file for on Teams. There'll be a few pictures. All you have to do is annotate them and explain which features are advantageous characteristics and how they help them in that environment that they're in. So this is a desert, this is a camel. So because the environment is sandy, the camel has large, wide feet to help it stay above the sand so that the camel doesn't sink into the sand. Okay, so that's just an example of one characteristic. You may want to do some research on these animals to help you annotate them. Okay, so head on over to Teams, complete the quiz, and if you would like an extra activity to do, then go for it. It will be in the file on Teams. I will see you next time. Bye.